have various operational units, the organelles, and they need some sort of nucleus to control how they are interacting with the environment. It's the same for you. You're inside an environment, you have a nervous system which controls the organs inside your body, and there's the brain at the top, which controls the organs through the nervous system. And then the same pattern for your organization there. It's inside an environment with customers and regulators and whatever else. You have various equivalents of the organs in your body. You have operational units, departments, divisions, teams, and so on. And if you're trying to manage those teams, then you're kind of the equivalent of the nucleus or the brain trying to organize all this. So this threefold system, division which exists in viable systems. So if we separate those parts out, what's interesting is if you look at the interactions between these parts, what's interesting is that the amount of complexity is not the same. So clearly, the environment that you're in is a lot more complex than you are. I'm walking around as this bundle of organs inside my body. I'm inside a room which is way more complex than all these other people out there. And I'm trying to navigate my way around this complexity. But my brain and my nervous system are even less complex than my body is. There's more cells in totality in my body than there are in my brain and my nervous system. So you have this imbalance of complexity. And as far as Stafford is concerned, this is the basic challenge of all management, is this imbalance in complexity. So here's a quote from it. What is the uniform basic commodity that we have to deal with in managing organization? Is there one thing that underlines the problems of man, materials, machinery, money? Well, I suggest to you that there is, and that thing is complexity. And I've also bolded out at the top there the word commodity, which is interesting. A uniform basic commodity, it's almost like using complexity as a kind of currency to talk about management challenges. But in order to do that, if you're talking about it in that way, it sounds like you obviously need a way to quantify what the complexity is. This is where Stafford then piggybacks on the work of an earlier cybernetician, Ross Ashby, who tried to come up with a way of talking about complexity in a way that it sounds like you're trying to quantify it. And he introduced this concept of variety as a way of measuring differences of complexity. Variety simply meaning the number of states that a system can be in. Now, when you first encounter that, that just sounds crazy. Like, maybe you're talking about a logic gate and that's got a variety of 2, is it on or off? But if you're trying to manage an entire organization, you're like, what's the variety of an organization? I mean, what's the variety of me? Like a gazillion, like how are you supposed to count that? But the point is not whether you can come up with some absolute quantity, it's always about the contrast, as I said before, between different levels of complexity. That's when you have a management challenge, is when there is an imbalance in the variety between different parts of your system. And many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with Ashby's law of requisite variety, which he summed up in this quite poetic way: only variety can destroy variety. As far as Stafford is concerned, this is, he described it as the equivalent of the law of gravity in management. You may not understand it, you may disagree with it, you may think it's wrong, but if I drop an apple, it's going to move towards the earth, whether I like it or not. So what is Ashby's law? What does it mean? It means if you want to control a system, if you want to manage it, if you want to govern it, then you need to find some way of deploying a level of complexity that's equal to the level of complexity to the system. To the extent that you can do that, you can control it. To the extent that you can't, you can't. Now there's the basic problem, is that we're all trying to organize, manage, run systems that are considerably more complex than we are. So we're running up all the time against Ashby's law. So how do you do that? Well, you look at how all these systems work. As I said before, they all have the same basic structure. And this is one of the mistakes I think people make about VSM, is that they think maybe it's a diagram. And then another mistake you often hear people say is, well, it's basically just taking the human body and it's saying the organization is like a human body. And there's lots and lots of management books that are like that. Let's use it as an analogy, as a metaphor. That's not what he's saying. He's saying that there's a higher level structure, a higher level model, which is true for all systems that are viable, that can maintain their identity in a changing environment. So what does that look like? Well, as I said before, we're all walking around in one. So the first book that Stafford published, detailing the viable system model, he used the human nervous system as a way to try to explain how this viable system model works. So that's what I'm going to do. This is Stafford's model on the left, or his diagram on the left from the book. And if you look, you'll see echoes here of that horrible, hideous, complex diagram I showed you before, where you've got the environment on the left here, the outside world, you've got a brain at the top, and then you've got all these organs down at the bottom. So, I could bring back these colourful blobs I've shown you before. Here's the environment on the left, here's management, here's an operation. That's basically the way your body works. If we build up this model one step at a time, the VSM is made of 5 subsystems, which are the subsystems that Stafford says are both necessary and sufficient for a system to be viable. So we start at the operational level. If you think about your body, you have all these organs. These organs sort of do their own thing, right? You're not at the minute having, if you're finding this interesting, you're not having to stop and remind your heart to beat because you got distracted. You're not having to tell your lungs to breathe. They're just doing their own thing. If you sense a difference in temperature or air pressure or whatever it is around you, your body will respond. You know, if a tiger walks in through the door, our bodies will respond. They'll shut down a whole bunch of subsystems, and your body will start, your heart will start pumping blood more energetically and so on. They have their own independent existences. But you remember I said at the start of the VSM is a recursive model. Well, each of these systems has the same basic structure as the structure above it. So your organs have the same structure as your body does. If you go to a lower level, the cells inside your organs have the same structure and so on. And what Stafford says, that's the same thing is true in an organization. So this is your operational functions, say your manufacturing company. These could be your factories, or maybe they're at different stages of your value chain, or whatever they are. They will have the same basic structure. The way you know what these operational units are, because you've got lots and lots of divisions, they're the things that kind of define what you do. So every organization has an accounts department, for example. That's not a system one, unless you happen to be an accountancy firm. If you're a manufacturing organization, then that probably is your factories, or it's workrooms or something. But these are the people that actually do the work. And they all have their own connection into the environment, because it's manufacturing, and presumably they have connections into supply chains, you have employees, you have lives outside of work, and so on and so forth. But in order for these things to function, they need to be coordinated in some sort of way. Sorry, I don't have to have a back button because I've only got clicker. System 2, I'll talk to you guys over here. System 2 is the local level of coordination that's required for the system 1s to function. So in your body, you think you have a spinal column. All of these neurons that are connecting up into your spine are actually intertwined together. So your organs can talk to each other without having to bother the brain, which is sort of this dream that a lot of executive teams have. Should probably turn off as well. Is that people get on with work without bothering them. I mean, as I said before, you think that's kind of how most of the organs in your work, in your body work. They don't keep telling you that you need to take in another breath. They just get on and do it. But in order to do that, they have to be able to talk to each other. So in an organization, you will always have some basic localized coordination services which allow the different system 1s to get on with the job. So timetables, schedules, work schedules. When you go into a school, nobody thinks that the timetable is some barbaric, autocratic invasion of their freedom. They treat it as a service. That if we didn't have a timetable, then just everything would be a complete mess. Right? It's the same in work organizations. You have to have some sort of work schedule, have to have some sort of ordering system that the different system 1s can talk to each other. However, the system 2 is a subsystem of system 3, which is, that's effectively our senior management. Because you can't just entirely have these system 1s just doing whatever they want. Sometimes you need to override what they would prefer to do, because you've got a higher level perspective of what's going on and what needs to change. So the tiger walks into the room, or the lion walks into the room, we need to just override whatever we're doing and get out. Unless, I don't know, it's the 1st century and you're a Christian martyr and you've just been thrown into a stadium with some higher level calling and we want to be martyrs and we need to stand and not run away from the lions or whatever. But the equivalent things happen in organizations where there's some sort of strategic threat coming in and we've been told we need to respond in a way that these guys just don't understand, but you have to do it anyway, or else you're not going to survive. And you can see that at this point we've now gone into a different level of recursion. Each of these individual operational systems has their own environment, their own sense of what's going on, but we've now gone up one level of management where we've got a broader view that we need to take some decisive action. However, System 3 is only looking at things inside and now. It's doing a resource bargaining process with each of the System 1, saying, I need you to do this, and I'll give you this amount of resource in order for you to be able to do that. You also, this is a later addition to the model from Stafford, is you need this System 3 star loop here, which is you have to have some way of monitoring to check that what you've asked to be done is actually being done. And the important thing here is that it's skipping a level of management to check that what's happening is actually what's happening. Now, as I say, that's all inside and now. If you move up to System 4, it's about outside in the future. So let's go back over to the body analogy. The System 3 is the lower brain functions, which are overriding the what's going on inside the System 1s. System 4 is your midbrain, which is what's connected up to your sensory organs and is collating all the information from your hearing and your sight and everything, producing a model of what's going on and therefore what's likely to be going on in the future in order to allow the system to prepare and adapt for future change. So in an organization, there's typically lots of people who are trying to do this, marketing is trying to do this, and strategic planning is trying to do this. An executive are probably trying to do this. Everyone's going out and reading magazines to read the runes of what's happening in the future. One of the main problems you get is that's generally not all brought together into a coherent whole, so that the organization as a whole has a sense of what's going on. Your brain does that beautifully. But what you do get is a contention now between System 3 and System 4, where System 3 is looking at the here and now and saying, well, I need all this resource in order to do this thing that you've told me to do right now. System 4 is looking out to the future. It's back to the Christians and the lions analogy that right now System 3 is saying I want to run away. System 4 is saying no, have a noble martyr's death or something. But there's a conflict between the two, and that's why for Stafford you have to have this final system at the top, System 5, which breaks that impasse, and that's ultimately what gives you the identity of the system. Which choices are you going to make? Are you going to adapt to become something different in the future? To the extent that you can do that, you are a viable system, but that might mean that you need to shift your identity somewhat in order to maintain viability. Or are you going to say, no, actually I'm this thing, even though it's no longer viable in this environment, and then you die. And that happens a lot, right? Organizations, when they do read the runes and realize something major is going to happen, they still don't change because they're so wedded to their identity. Well, no, we're this kind of thing, and we're going to go down fighting, and they go down because organizations die all the time. Okay, 5 systems. Different people give these different names. Stafford just gave them numbers. I suggest one reason why that's actually quite helpful is it gets us out of the mindset of thinking this is like an org chart, which it's not. It's, as I said, it's a meta model describing what a viable system looks like. And you can use it for organizations, you can use it for teams, you can use it for anything that exists as a viable system. What it's not saying is, this is marketing, and this is factory floor, and this is this could be a one-person organization. If you're a sole trader and you're trying to exist in a competitive marketplace, if you're managing to turn a profit and maintain your viability, you are doing all of these things. Or perhaps outsourcing them to somebody else, but they have to be being done in order for you as a system to maintain viability. Right, why is this? Does that make sense? Is it really complicated? Literally that's it. That's it. You can read all the books and go into lots and lots of detail about a whole variety of equations and watch up between them. There's lots of other things you could, but that's basically consistent. Now, why would you want to learn this as a model and apply it? Well, a few reasons. Firstly, how do you apply it?
Environment is also driven by policy change. So how does that affect?
Can you shout?
So the question was, I think, that the environment can be reflected in policy change.
That's right.
So how does that reflect? So as I said before, the word policy, that's just a made-up word. I've just added that there so that you can kind of remember what these were about. Absolutely, so you can have external policy driving environmental change. The reason for calling System 5 here policy is that's in most large organisations, that's probably the board and the shareholders and the people who have the final say above the exec about what you're going to do. So that's the policy for the organisation. If you go up a higher level of recursion again into the ecosystem that organisation works in, you see the same process. So you're going to have some government bodies and so on, and standards institutes and so on, setting policy rules that will govern the next recursion up. Does that make sense? Why is this a good thing? You can use it in lots of different ways. So you can use it in a diagnostic sense. You can go into an organisation, ask some questions. If you've got this model in your head, it's just amazing how quickly you can get a really good handle about what's going on. It sort of almost seems magical. If you talk to people who use this model a lot, and organisations, you obviously you don't lead by saying let's do a viable system model exercise, but just in a conversation and a few questions, so people don't quite understand how you have you been to this organisation before? How do you know what's going on? Well, it's nothing to do with that. It's just if you've got a better mental model of how a viable system works, and you pick up some things that are going on that are contrary to this model, then that's the organisation that's probably struggling. They can very quickly pick up what's going on. If you go in, for example, and you can never get hold of the key decision maker, and chief executive is constantly busy all the time, and they keep making meetings, and the meetings keep getting cancelled and keep getting cancelled. You start asking some questions. Often you'll find that the chief executive, for being stereotypically a chief executive, is a System 3 type role. They're probably spending an awful lot of the time going out there doing System 2 type stuff, trying to tell people what to do, because the System 2 hasn't actually been set up by somebody. Decisions that should be being made at a local level aren't being made. If you look on the SCiO website, there's dozens and dozens of these archetypal problems that arise that you can detect using the viable system model. You can also use it in a design way. If you're designing an operating model, whatever design you come up with, you can use this as effectively like a template to check. We're proposing to organize the business in this way. Have we checked all these boxes? Does everything connect up in this way? Because if it doesn't, it's not going to be viable.
See, how is it possible for System 3 to do a System 2 role? It's purely functional. I could imagine a person surrounding a person with having System 3 functionality.
Yeah.
I'd find out because I've got a very, very good understanding with VSM. There's a deficiency in System 2.
Yes.
So that new function just comes into being. And I'm doing it. Rather than say System 3, just not go System 2.
Yeah. Exactly. To me, that's
functional, purely functional.
That's the problem. Is if I'm, I should probably be doing the functional role. That's a System 3 activity. Yeah. If I'm spending all my time going out there,
it is your variety, so it means you're no longer doing that System 3 role to the extent you should be doing, because there was another issue on elsewhere. So System 2 comes into being, and then you're actually creating a new function because that needs to be in place to stabilise the system.
Yes.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So it's a pretty small organisation. It would be perfectly reasonable for one person to do.
Results by using the perform function. That's another issue.
I've got 3 minutes to finish this, and I've got about 3 points left, so I'm just going to get on with that. See if I can get to the end of it. Also, just mention non-organisationals. If you got this in your mind, I've found anyway, you just end up using it everywhere. For yourself, you can use it for families, for societies, or anything you're involved in, which you're trying to create a viable system to make something work.
Your missus loves you, doesn't she?
Yeah. Sunday evening chats about VSM. Not. Advantage, why is this a good thing? So 3 very simple reasons, and I'm sure you can get lots more from people around the room. Firstly, speed. So the rate at which you can get a really good handle on what's going on, that often turns out to be right, is just second to none. So you don't need to spend months and months and months and months doing endless workshops, talking to everybody. If you've got this in your head, you can do an awful lot of that work much, much faster. It's really simple, I think. And one of the main reasons it's simple is this final point of recursion. So the recursion terrifies people when they first encounter it. Once you get it inside your head, it's just fantastic because you use the same model at whatever level you're talking about. You know, it could be your team, or you could be talking to the Prime Minister. You know, whoever's trying to create a viable system from the top to the bottom, it's the same basic model that you're working with all the way through. And that's it. If you want these slides, then that's my details. Drop me a line.